Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Australian Roundtable podcast on Sunday the 19th of June 2015. I'm your host John LeBon and I'm joined via Google Hangout by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being there.
Good to be here, Jono.
And we are also fortunate enough to again have with us via Google Hangout our resident wise old elder, the silver fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, for new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable which broadcasts live every Sunday from 3 p.m. or thereabouts. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts. There's already quite a few people there, so hello to all of you. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download for free from our website, ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site so you can verify and analyse it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. In the domestic segment, we'll take a look at 7 pieces, more anti-Nazi propaganda, more MH17 anniversary propaganda, Australia topping the world for climate change denial, Queensland government to eat into super for employees, the big 4 banks in this country facing a $30 billion capital shortfall, a Tongan man given refugee status here in Australia due to being gay, and an update on a Jewish alleged child molester who fled to Israel. Then International will take a look at 4 pieces, a 94-year-old accountant imprisoned for his part in the so-called holocaust, Twitter joining the global plan to control the flow of news, Donald Trump, the presidential candidate, and Circus of the oligarchs, Greece sign new bailout deal. So another packed show today, boys. I'm looking forward to it. But we'd like to start off just by saying hello and seeing how we all are. So we'll start with you there, Ethan. It's been a while since we last spoke. How have you been?
Yeah, not too bad, Jono. Another interesting week has gone past. You know, I was having dinner last night with a friend, and we were discussing, you know, music and whatnot, culture, and how we were born in an era that we didn't particularly want to be born into, an era of economic collapse and whatnot. And then I mentioned the fact that this is the most interesting time to be alive. You know, we could have been born at any time in history, but we are born right now when we are coming to a crossroads, and we're blessed to be enlightened like this and try to search for truth. So that's what I'm trying to do with this show, and I think it is an amazing time to be alive, and it's great to do this podcast. I'm looking forward to a good show again.
Oh, good stuff. And Lindsay, over there in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, how have you been lately, my good man?
Yeah, I've been very good. I didn't realise Ethan was as deep as that. That's amazed me.
I do like to get deep sometimes, Lindsay. It's the greater philosophical fight is important to me.
Yeah, I don't think I've got that in me. But anyway, thanks for that. Yes, I've had a good week, and I'm ready to go actually.
Oh, good stuff. I happened to be up late last night myself, updating our website, and I had the cricket on in the background. And all of a sudden, I get through this email from Lindsay at what was it, 2 in the morning with your agenda? So staying up very late lately, Lindsay.
Yeah. It's just since my mum's been in hospital, I'm trying to fit everything in, and people come down to visit her and stuff like that. And so I don't get I used to spend the whole, like, perhaps half of Friday and nearly the whole of Saturday getting the agenda done, and then suddenly I can't do that anymore. So I've got to stay up and just burn at the other end. So anyway, I think I'll be all right.
I got through your email because I felt like I was up all alone just watching the cricket, updating the site, and then it turns out Lindsay was working on his material as well. That's the kind of effort that we put into this show, and hopefully the listeners enjoy it. We'll get straight into the intro segment where we just take a look at the lighter side of the news, and I've got one here from the Herald Sun down there in Melbourne, so let me read this one out. This is from July 9. It's entitled, "Women Are Less Likely to Use a Time Travel Machine to Assassinate Hitler." Let me read out a short passage from the article. "Have you ever wondered which sex would be likely to travel back in time to kill Hitler? Because researchers from the United States, Canada, and Germany certainly did, and they've just published their findings. The paper, published in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, found women were less likely to use a time travel machine to head back in history to assassinate the Nazi leader. For the purposes of the study, researchers conducted a meta-analysis of 40 studies in which 6,100 subjects were asked a series of questions concerning murder, torture, and other morally conflicting issues. In terms of the questions specifically related to Hitler, it was discovered that 60% of men were willing to kill the Führer compared to 55% of women. Author of the paper, Dr. Paul Conway, said the researchers found a gender bias in regards to all moral decision-making scenarios, not just the one involving killing Hitler. They both get it. They know that killing Hitler to stop World War II is better for everyone, end quote. And you have to read this article for yourself to get the full gist of it. They've got a very amusing photo. You couldn't take a worse photo of Hitler. I think they've photoshopped in his moustache there, actually, but to think that this is still being printed 70 years after the alleged end of World War II, it really does make you wonder, Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there, how do they go to get the funding for this? What there's something wrong with the whole system. What would you put in and say, give me this money, I want to see if we can have an imaginary time machine that goes back and imaginarily kills Hitler. You know, what absolute garbage it is. And who in their right mind would give? It'd have to be government money. They wouldn't get it from the private side. Well, maybe they would. I'm just thinking about that. Maybe the ADL might have given them some money or something like that. But it's just, the whole thing's just so, I was going to swear again, but it's just so absurd. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
You need a fake time contraption to go back and stop something that didn't happen. It's all make-believe, Ethan. What say you?
It certainly is, Jono. And even if it was real, I like the fact that they think they can just go back in time and kill Hitler. Like, they'll just show up and be able to kill one of the most powerful men on the planet at the time, just walk straight up to him if they had the chance. I mean, this is just ridiculous, and it's, we've seen Nazi propaganda throughout the news all this week, and this hits a number of ways, you know, like studying people to ask them if they want to go back in time and kill Hitler. You know, what purpose does that serve? I mean, it's utter garbage, and these journalists should be completely ashamed, not sleep well at night for publishing such satire in mainstream press, Jono.
Yeah, let me read out one more little bit from the article. Mr. Conway said the difference is men are more likely to just accept it needs to be done, while women struggle with the guilt of having to kill someone to achieve the goal. However, Mr. Conway admits this is not necessarily a bad thing and could be used to demonstrate why women would be better at leading a world free from war. I've kind of been arguing that a little bit, he said. And quote, again, we provide links to all of this information at our site, so go and check out this article for yourself. You have to understand, this was printed in the highest circulating newspaper in all of Australia. The Herald Sun has a circulation of about 500,000 people, and I know that because I had to look it up the other day when I realised that I'd actually been published in the Herald Sun myself recently. I don't suppose either of you two have heard about this.
No.
John Le Bon made a little cameo in the Herald Sun the other day. You see, I was down in Melbourne for a friend's wedding, as you guys know. I ended up doing the ARP and Sunday sessions down in Melbourne this time last week, and when I was waiting to meet someone at the front of Flinders Street Station, I saw the Herald Sun vox popping people, went along, said g'day, flashed a smile. Next thing you know, I made it into the Herald Sun, so I'm getting published in the same newspaper as the one that's saying that 60% of men would go back and kill Hitler. And we are living in bizarre times, but you know what? We have to get into the domestic segment proper, and the first topic for today is more anti-Nazi propaganda. Lindsay, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, this is trifle again, but I thought I'd have to mention it for the same reason you just mentioned that other article. This is on page 13 of the Courier Mail on the 15th of July, and the headline read, Nazi machine gun, sniper rifle found stashed in toilet. And it says, and I'll quote, counter-terror police have uncovered a disturbing stash of dangerous weapons, including a submachine gun and sniper rifle in an abandoned house in Sydney South. Now, my take on this is, it turns out that the machine gun was a German wartime weapon, an MP40 Schmeisser submachine gun. Now, nowhere in the body of the story is the word Nazi used. It was just a good, convenient headline, and again, still over and over, you know, for 70 years, they keep having to use the word Nazi and machine gun or whatever they can find. A bit like you know, we'll go back and we'll kill Hitler. That's the same sort of thing. And I've only got one really request is, please, Rupert, give it a rest. We had a gut full of it. That's about all I've got to say on it.
Yeah, and I thought it would make a nice little foray into the domestic segment. It follows on from the intro one pretty quickly. Ethan, any comments, or should we press on?
Just to back up what Lindsay said, we're sick of it, and it's not just to do with Nazis. They use these words as indicators to try and strike fear into people's subconscious. The anti-terror legislation here in Queensland, anti-bikie law, doesn't have the word bikie at all in the entire legislation. Doesn't even target bikies in the legislation. This article, Nazi machine gun, doesn't even have the word Nazi anywhere in it or refer to it being used as a Nazi weapon. These people should be held accountable for it, and that's why we bring these things up on the show, just to make people aware, because if you take notice of how much they do this, you should be able to discuss that with your family and friends to try and break them out of the cycle of believing this nonsense, Jono.
Yeah, and it's like I say to people, you have to ask yourself why 70 years after World War II was supposed to have ended, are they still demonising Hitler? Is it the case that maybe he said some things or did some things that if people were to find out today, they'd say, hold on, I wish my leaders would do that. I mean, Hitler, no matter what you say about the administration otherwise, they did take a basket case economy and turned it into one of the most powerful economic machines the world has ever known. And they did that through policies which seem to benefit the average person and not the greedy banksters. So maybe they need to demonise Hitler to stop people from realising the guy actually did plenty of good things, and if only our leaders were half as ingenious as this person was when it came to making things better for the average person. But we can't get bogged down in that one today. We need to move on to the second topic. It actually is very related. This is to do with the MH17 anniversary and more propaganda demonising, in this case, Putin. Lindsay, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that. There are a few things I'm going to quote here, but I'll begin with the Courier Mail, because on page 22, Julie Bishop had a personal column she'd written for the Courier Mail, and it was titled "Shot Down, Never Again," and that was on the 12th of July. And I'll give just a very small quote to give you an idea. It said, the first anniversary of July the 17th of the downing of Malaysian airline flight MH17 is a poignant reminder of the senseless loss of 298 innocent lives. And then on the 16th of July, on the ABC television 7:30 report, she was talking to Lee Sales, I think it is, and I've put a link in there for people who want to go and have a look at the transcript of that, because it's quite interesting. But it was much along the same lines. And then in the Courier Mail, on I'm trying to find the. Oh, here we are, on the 17th of July. So that was the morning after the 7:30 report. There's this massive front page, and then I think there was another 3 or 4 pages on the inside about the very same thing. But the Courier Mail came out, and I'll give you a quote from that. A chilling video has revealed how Russian-backed rebels, notice they call them Russian-backed rebels, realised they had accidentally committed a mass atrocity, downlining Malaysian aircraft flight MH17 and killing 298 people when they ransacked the East Ukraine disaster site. The Courier Mail can reveal disturbing vision shot by one of the rebels after the jet was blown out of the sky, proves the militants were responsible, and shows rebels rifling through the luggage of some of the 38 Australians killed in the horror. It shows that they initially believed a Ukrainian Air Force fighter jet had been shot down using a ground-to-air missile system. The film recorded their dismay as minutes later, they discover the aircraft is a commercial airliner. Now, when I read the article, that's not what came across to me at all. But anyway, I'll give you a rundown of my assessment of this whole thing. So that basically, Julie Bishop does a personal column in the Courier Mail on the 12th of July, and then an interview with Lee Sales on the ABC 7:30 report on the 16th of July. And the very next morning, the Courier Mail comes out with its front page and several more pages about a video claiming to be Ukrainian rebels, and they call them Russian-backed rebels. They didn't say they were rebels against Ukraine, scavenging the wreck site. And that's all it is. That's all you've got, is them scavenging the wreck site. Now, they assume from this video that this is evidence of the Ukrainian rebels having shot down MH17. Now, I didn't see anything in the article at all that actually led to that. The Courier Mail claimed it, but I didn't see anything that actually led to it. when the rebels showed bewilderment and they appeared to be expecting to find the wreckage of a Ukraine fighter plane. Now, this fits in with the reports at the time about a Ukrainian fighter shooting down MH17 out of the sky. I remember there were all sorts of YouTube videos and various other things about it at the time. And there is no mention at all of corpses being decomposed when they were found within hours of the crash, as reported at the time. Now, I don't know whether the listeners remember that or not, but I remember there was a lot made of that, the fact that a lot of these passengers were actually decomposing when they were found within hours, and it wasn't that hot on the battlefield. This whole thing, to me, when I read it, the reason I brought it in here is that it just smacked of a staged propaganda exercise with cooperation between the ABC, the Courier Mail, and the commercial television channels, because the commercial television channels picked up on the Courier Mail report that following night. So it was just like one after the other. It was almost like dominoes falling down. They pumped this into us, and the thing that's got me is I really don't know what they were trying to get out of this. Was this them trying to preempt an adverse report that apparently is coming up in October or sometime about the MH17 crash, or what was the other purpose? And if we've got listeners who've got some sort of inside knowledge here, I'd love to know about it, if they can let us know what's going on. But Ethan, can you give me some sort of insight on what your thoughts are about this?
Yeah, no worries, Lindsay. When you brought this up, it made me think back to when I first started researching into MH17, and I don't particularly have any answers. I focused more on look at how our government is using this and look at the propaganda they're spewing. And I wrote an article at tottnews.com, which I'll add to the links at ozroundtable.com for this story, where I spoke about the media blaming Putin with no evidence at all, no justification, and all of the evidence that Russia had released, saying that it was the US-backed Ukrainians that had actually done it. Now, I don't know if the event was real or not, or whether it was a false flag attack, or I don't really know the details of it. I'm not going to try and predict what it was, but whenever the government is coming out to do it, whether it's real or not, same with the Sydney siege, no matter what the event is, the government is always going to benefit from it. And that's what we need to get across to the people. And that's why Julia Bishop's appearing on television and whatnot. There is some sort of an agenda they're trying to push here by resurfacing it. And I don't know what it is, so I'm going to be keeping a lookout to try and find it, Jono.
Yeah, look, in the live chat, a few of the commenters are saying, well, maybe this plane event is real, maybe it's fake, how do we know? I guess the point that I would make is you have to remember the vast majority of people believe the news, and they believe they need their government to protect them. So if they believe that there are these Russian-backed rebels and there's a war that's brewing, on the western coast on the western side of Russia or the eastern part of Europe, or whatever the case may be, they think they need the Australian government to protect them. And you have to remember that the average person who doesn't think very straight, the news has an effect on the way that they think. If you can keep the people in fear, then you can keep them under your control, and so it makes it so much easier for the government to pass things like the mandatory vaccination legislation and these kinds of things. So even though most of our listeners are probably aware that the MH17 issue is, at best, a convoluted, exaggerated story, and at worst, a complete fabrication, one of the aims of a show like this is that maybe somebody who isn't as familiar with this stuff might come along and listen to people talking about the fact that, hey, this story, we're being lied to about it, and we're being lied to because the government wants you scared. And that's, I guess, the reason why we still talk about these things, even though most of our listeners would say, well, the mandatory vaccination is more pressing. And for me, on this issue, at the time, I believed that the plane thing was real. I hadn't really done enough research at the time. I didn't understand what fakeology was all about. So I just believed that the plane had been shot down. I just disagreed that the evidence said that it was the Russian-backed rebels who'd done it. Now I sit here and I look at some of the stories, and people like Fatima Dzerzhinsky, the woman who supposedly was going to work for NASA, and her parents were there on the scene within hours with shirts with her face printed on it, and the whole thing is just laughable. I now lean towards it all being a completely fake media story, but it's not really what's important at the moment. Isn't so much whether the story was fake or real. What's important is that the people at home believe it's real, and they believe they need the government to protect them. Lindsay, do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at. I think what prompted me to bring this up was not to go back and rehash, whether it's real or not or whatever. It was just I'd never seen. Well, I probably have seen it in the past, but never took notice of it. The domino effect here, the way they had that so well planned out. So you had story after story, and it was accelerating and getting bigger as it went along. And that's what got me. I thought this is you've got a minister involved, you've got the ABC, you've got the Courier Mail, and it may be in other newspapers as well, and you've also got all the commercial television stations. I think that's what got to me, and that's why I brought it up. But anyway, I've said pretty much everything I want to say about it now.
Well, Lindsay, what are your suspicions then? Do you think that they're trying to prep the Australian public for some kind of, I don't know, war with Ukraine? I mean, what do you think their agenda is here?
Well, all I heard was that there's another report coming out later in the year. I think it's October or something like that, about who's going to be responsible, who the investigators are going to nominate as being responsible for the thing. And I'm just wondering whether they've got a whiff of an adverse report that it's not going to be the Russian-backed rebels or whatever. So now they're doing a propaganda thing to get in first. I mean, I've got no real reason to say that, but it's just it's a feeling I've got from this. It just seems too constructed. And I mean, I really don't know, but that's the way it's starting to feel to me. Like that maybe all this propaganda we've had up to now is all going to go down the drain because they're going to have a finding against them. That's about the only thing I can think of. Especially the Courier Mail. It was so big. I mean, the front page and another 2 or 3 pages inside, it was just so big that there had to be a reason for it. And there had to be a reason for it coming as it did straight after the minister and then again on the ABC. And, it was dominoes, I think, says it all. I'll give that back to you now. Yeah.
Ethan, any final thoughts on MH17 and the propaganda wave that we've been receiving for the last week or so?
No, not particularly, Jono. Just to tell everyone, my thoughts, as I just mentioned before, I don't really concern myself with the actual event itself. I think that particularly at this point in time, it's not really constructive to do that. But what I do concentrate on is who benefits from that. Where does it go from here? I don't know. It wasn't until Lindsay brought it up today that I had realised they've resurfaced it again. So just as I will be doing, I encourage all the researchers and all the listeners to go out there and to try and form your own opinion about where this could go, because the way that they're setting this up is always for an agenda, and we have to be aware of that, Jono.
Good stuff. All right, well, we'll move on to the third topic for domestic today. It's to do with Australia apparently topping the world for climate change denial. Ethan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. Well, I'll jump straight into this here because I think that the piece I'm about to read gives the context perfectly for me. And this was a bit of a surprising development to circulate in the press this week. Let me read out an article by the Sydney Morning Herald entitled, "Australia Tops the World for Climate Change Denial." Quote, "Nearly 1 in 5 Australians do not believe in climate change, making the country the worst in the world for climate skeptics," a study of almost 20,000 people has found. The research by the University of Tasmania found 17% of Australians thought climate change was not real, compared with 15% of people in Norway, 13% of people in New Zealand, and 12% of Americans. The study, published in the journal Global Environmental Change, was based on data collected as a part of an international social survey program in 2010 and 2011. Researchers focused on 14 industrialised countries, including Australia, Canada, England, France, Germany, New Zealand, and the United States. And in total, 20,000 people were surveyed, so not that many. It found that the reasons for being a climate skeptic varied according to the political context of each country. However, people across the board were more likely to be skeptics in countries that had high carbon emissions, and also more likely to be skeptics if their countries were vulnerable because of climate change. End quote. So this article is just complete garbage, and it has a picture of people in the article. I'll leave a link at ozroundtable.com, but there's a picture in the article of a whole bunch of people at the beach with their heads in the sand and all of this nonsense. And two things jumped out at me after reading this. One was, being a media skeptic as I am, this is the perfect example of media biased. You know, the media in theory is a collection of news and current affairs, black and white with no opinion or agenda. That's in theory. And if this was the case, we should just be hearing about the skeptics, the percentages, and that's where the article ends. Instead, they are going on to talk about how this is wrong, associated with pictures to back up this notion, talking about skeptics are in countries that are more vulnerable to climate change, all this nonsense, just regurgitating mainstream opinion, and it's here to serve an agenda. And even with the simple reporting of it, this is where they're serving the agenda. And the second one was, what does this agenda actually serve? Well, if you go back through our back catalogue, John did a great job in breaking down the global warming, man-made climate change fast for what it is, who benefits, what the end goal is, etc., etc. So I certainly recommend you check those episodes out if you haven't. I think they're around the episode 30 mark, if I'm not mistaken. But Jono, for me personally, this is a positive thing to come out of the media this week, but at the same time, they like to do stories like this. We mentioned before about an article that talked about Bin Laden and him being a conspiracy theorist, and how great it was that all of these things were categorized in it, with skull and bones, all of these key indicators for people. But then that's a negative because people then dismiss it. So Australia, even though it's good to see that if the statistics are right, that we are denying that climate change is real, which is a positive thing in my opinion, based on, you know, what we've shown on the show. But it can also be a bad thing. So it's provoked a lot of discussion. So I'm interested to get your thoughts, Jono, on Australia leading climate change skepticism and what this article is being used for in the media.
Yeah, well, I think we need to be careful with the language we use. They're using the term denier intentionally because they know that that term is already stigmatized in the minds of the masses. So I would refrain from calling myself a climate change denier. I'd prefer to use a term like climate change skeptic if I had to use a label at all. The issue that we've got right now is that if you go and speak to the average person who's over about the age of 50, there's a very good chance that they'll say that they think this climate change stuff is all nonsense, or they'll be a Greens voter. There's no in between. They're either a fully fledged Greens, you know, the world's getting bad and the Greens are going to save us kind of person, or they say no, climate change is at best nonsense and at worst just an outright fraud. The issue is that people under 30, people my age and younger, are generally completely on board with this climate change nonsense because that's how they've been indoctrinated through school. They don't know any different. Even when I was in primary school, already this was starting to creep into the curriculum. I suspect it's probably gotten worse since then. So when the article that you cite talks about more Australians being climate change skeptics, if we can use that term, I suspect that most of those people polled who said that were of the older voting bloc. Most of the ones who are completely on board with this climate change nonsense are the younger ones. So you think through a few steps, where are we headed in 5 or 10 years? You're going to have a whole bunch of people actively pleading for the government to steal more of their money from them to fix a problem that doesn't exist. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, I've spoken about this before. When you go back and look at some of the United States and stuff that came out 15 or 20 years ago, they were calling for an environmental tax on the whole world. And this is basically what this is setting up for. So, yeah, I agree with everything you've just said there. And they don't have to wait very long because the people you're talking about have only got another 20 or 30 years and they'll all be in the grave. So the ones coming through will then have rain. So it is a bit of a concern to me that you're going to have all these people who've gone through the public school sector and have been brainwashed into believing this is a wonderful thing. You know, it's like you just said. Isn't it wonderful? We'll be able to give all our money away to the United Nations to help us. Yeah, like hell you will. So anyway, that's yeah. I don't know what else you can do about it except do what we're doing and try and get a bit of message out to as many people as we can, and when we meet people in our everyday lives. The only one other thing that I'd add is during the week I got an email which originated from Viv Forbes, who's a very, I think he might be the Queensland leader of this sort of climate change skeptics or whatever you like to call them. And he had a lot of details in there that I'd never heard of before about wind farms and various other things. And it was almost like a science-based evaluation of the whole alternative energy scene as well. So there is stuff out there. but it's not easy to find. So I'll give it to Ethan and see if he's got any more to add to that.
Yeah, that's you brought up some good points there, Lindsay. And as we know, Bob Brown, when he was the leader of the Greens Party, called for a global government for environmental taxes and whatnot. It's nothing new, but for me, John's completely right about the actual statistics. If they are real, they say that they don't match up, etc., in the article. But if the statistics are real, of course, the younger generation won't be as critical in terms of this topic as their counterparts of an older generation, and we've seen that now. They've introduced climate change courses at University of Queensland, up in Brisbane there, and the younger generation are being brainwashed from a young age. The reason I brought this article up was because I've seen a lot of people on social media this week that are critical thinkers in the truth movement, whatever you want to call this, saying this is such a good thing. Look at this article. We top the world for climate change skepticism, and that's a fantastic thing in sharing the article. And the reason I bring that up is because it does go a step further than that. Looking just at the media article specifically, you need to look at how they're using this to hurt us by putting this up there and revealing that we are the most likely to be skeptical to climate change. They're doing the exact same thing as the conspiracy theorist article, because then they reinforce the notion that anyone who denies it is crazy. So even though it may seem like a good thing on the surface, articles like this do more damage to hurt us because it's getting more widespread attention, and it's counterproductive to any arguments that climate change skeptics do want to make, because they go, oh yeah, like in that article with all those people with their head in the sand. So I just thought I'd bring this up because it was really a hot topic, especially on social media this week. A lot of people debating whether it's real or not and whatnot. So I just wanted to take a different spin on it, Jono, and speak about the article in general. But if we're just looking on an individual basis, I do take a little bit of optimism from the results. It's good to see that a little bit of Australians still remain skeptical.
Well, I think one of the points that I try to make as often as I can, especially to listeners of shows like this, is it's one thing to listen to a show like this, it's one thing to partake in the live chat, to do your own videos, these kinds of things, but it's so important that we get out there and talk to people on the street, not just to plant seeds in their minds or to get ideas out there that they might not have heard from the mainstream media, but also to keep your own finger on the pulse of what the average person actually believes. And I have noticed that if I ask the average person, have sea levels risen, usually they'll say yes, and I'll say, okay, then how much do you think they've risen by? And I get people telling me things like, oh, I don't know, a meter, a couple of meters. Now, this is an absurd thing for them to be claiming on so many levels, but one thing that you can do is point out to them, the sea levels haven't risen. In fact, I've got an article right here, ABC, Pacific Islands growing, not sinking, 3 June 2010. Again, all links provided at ausroundtable.com, AUSroundtable.com. Quote, climate scientists have expressed surprise at findings that many low-lying Pacific islands are growing, not sinking. Islands in Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Federated States of Micronesia are among those which have grown, largely due to coral debris, land reclamation, and sediment. The findings, published in the magazine New Scientist, were gathered by comparing changes to 27 Pacific islands over the last 20 to 60 years using historical aerial photos and satellite images. And it goes on like, end quote, and it goes on like that. Now, the sea levels aren't rising. The islands that we were told were sinking are not sinking, they're growing. And this isn't some conspiracy theory website. This is direct from the ABC, quoting papers straight out of scientific journals. So this isn't something that can be disputed. And once people realize, wow, I was wrong about sea levels rising, maybe there's a chance they might go and do more research. Of course, as all of us know, most people won't do that. Cognitive dissonance will kick in. They'll go back to their programmed thinking patterns, what have you, for most of them. But we do have the basic facts on our side here. The sea levels aren't rising, and they're indoctrinating people at school and through TV to believe the sea levels are rising. So this is a key linchpin of their whole argument, and it's very easy to debunk. And so when people say, oh, it's climate change denial, I say I prefer skeptic, but you know what I prefer to use instead of that? Debunker. We can debunk the climate change myth just with some basic facts. And again, I encourage listeners, check out our website, ausroundtable.com. There's no ads there. There's no donation button. There's just links to all the information that we talk about. So you can check it out for yourself, do your own research, and then if you do like some information that's there, you can pass it on to other people. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jono, and definitely go back and check out. I'll leave links at ozroundtable.com to the episodes where you did your two massive feature pieces debunking the lies that are being fed to us through the mainstream media. So for everyone, I brought this up as a positive thing, but also as a way for people to still be a little bit concerned about what the media are doing. But I take this as a victory. But just be aware of how the media use the tactics against us, and don't feed into the lies and deception. But it is good to see that some people out there are still skeptic. And if we can bring this up, if we can spread shows like this, we can get more people to join into the discussion and break through some of the spin that the mainstream media are pushing on us, Jono.
Well, and it's not just spin, it is a coordinated campaign to make people believe that they're doing damage to the earth simply by living, by breathing, by leading normal human lives, and that the only way to solve that is for the government of their country and the world government to have more say in how they lead their life, to take more money from them via taxation. Of course, as we all know, you don't pay your taxes and you don't do it properly, and eventually they'll come for you with men with guns. That's how it works. Now, there are legal arguments that can be made about how you can avoid paying taxes, and I have work planned. We'll discuss this in a future episode. But for the average person, they do feel as though they have to pay their taxes, and this is just another way to tax the people, to convince them we need to do this to save the world from rising sea levels. And it is a coordinated campaign, not just via the mainstream media, but by school as well. Let me read you a quote from Edward Bernays, the grandfather of propaganda. This is from page 37 of his book, Propaganda. Quote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country." End quote. Of course, Bernays in the same book also points out the fact that people like him are paid to convince us that we voted for the government that we got, not the other way around. And he's saying clearly right here, we manipulate the minds of the masses, and that's what we're dealing with right now. The average young person under the age of 30 who truly believes in global warming and the threat that humans are to the planet, that's a belief system that's been very heavily ingrained into them from a young age. It won't be undone very easily. That's why it's important that those of us who know better are out there planting seeds. I would recommend people don't waste your time getting into a debate with one of these people, because you're not going to get very far. They're arguing from emotion, they're arguing from indoctrination, but just planting seeds here and there. Oh, you still believe sea levels are rising, but we know that they're not. That's all you have to say to them, then move on. If just a few of us were out there doing that constantly, oh, you believe the sea levels are rising? Oh, you know that's been debunked, don't you? Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. It wouldn't take too many of us out there planting these kinds of seeds to start getting through to some people. Now, is that going to change the world? Maybe, maybe not. But I think you've got more chance of succeeding by just planting seeds here and there than trying to get into debates with people whose minds have been completely manipulated. Lindsay, I'll give you a final word on this, and then we'll press on.
Yeah, I agree with you. You're dealing with a religion, and we've got to remember that. And you deal with the religion the same as you deal with any other religion. You're not going to convince people because it's an act of faith, and that's exactly what you were just describing. And that's all I've got to add.
Fair enough. All right. Well, Ethan, this was your segment. I'll give you final thoughts, and then we'll press on.
No, I think you summed it up perfectly there, Jono.
Oh, good stuff. Well, we'll move on to the fourth topic for domestic today. This is to do with the Queensland state government eating into their own employees' superannuation. Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. This was in the Courier Mail on page 6 on the 14th of July, and the headline read, "Holiday on Super to Boost Coffers." And I'll give you a very small quote out of it. "The Palaszczuk government could give itself a holiday from making superannuation contributions for some public servants as it casts around for new ways to pay down Queensland's $480 billion debt." That's the end of the quote. And the reason I put this in here, it's not meant to be a scare and fear tactics or anything like that, but just a reminder that this isn't the first government to steal or use superannuation funds for their own purposes as an easy way out of fiscal responsibility. If you are aware about what's going on, you won't rely solely on a retirement source which disappears and leaves you in an impecunious state until you die. Now, I'm probably biased in this direction because I'm at the age I'm at. I can see how difficult it would be for the rest of your life as you're going downhill to your death if suddenly the money just wasn't there and you were depending upon it. So that's the reason I bring it up. Just be aware that the rot is already setting in by this. And I think the other thing that upset me about this was that I didn't see any of those workers' unions complaining about it. That's the other thing. Whether because they're in bed with this Labor government or what, I don't know. But it's worth keeping in mind that Liberal, Labor, any part of the world, I know Poland delved into superannuation. I think Argentina did at one stage. It's a common thing. When in doubt, steal the people's superannuation. And I think you need to have that in the back of your mind and make sure that you've got a few different irons in the fire for your old age. I'll leave it at that and see whether, Ethan, if you've got any comment on that, or we just throw it to John.
Well, Lindsay, when I was in school, I was fortunate enough to have a good history teacher before I went to the bad one, the head of department. But he said in a very insulting way to the class, he laughed at us and said that he is going to be the last generation to get his superannuation, and taught us that everything's going to go downhill. You can't rely on this because the government are just going to take it whenever they want, and they're going to use it for this zombie economic system that they have. They're going to use it for these debts that we supposedly have to pay, that this country supposedly has to pay. All of this nonsense that's being taken, that's being pushed out rather, and they're using people's pensions and superannuations, not just here but globally, to try and do this, and here is another example of that, a perfect example of how they're planting the seeds for them to do it again. And as you said, there's no opposition between this, Lindsay, because there's probably some shady details involved there. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it's pretty safe to assume, because these unions have to stand up for these workers and these public servants that should be getting the money that the government said that they would get, and it's not going to happen. So people just need to be aware that this system is not here to benefit you. Government is not your friend, and these things are as loosely based asset. They are loosely based as any asset that is unreliable. What do you say, Jono?
Well, we've got more than 40 people watching live right now. Thanks to everyone for coming out. In the live chat, Haydos Gambers says that when people say super, he laughs. This stuff makes him mad. Els Talbot says, what super? This generation won't have any. Silver Slave 333 says, get your super out now. I think a lot of people are starting to work out that this whole superannuation scam is just that, a scam. And I always refer to works like people by George Orwell, Animal Farm. Of course, in the book Animal Farm, if you haven't read it, it's a lot smaller, it's easier to read than 1984, and it makes some really prescient points. In the book Animal Farm, of course, they're all told, all the animals are told, if you work really hard, then when you get to retirement age, you'll be put out to pasture, you won't have to work anymore, food will be provided. That will be the benefit for you working for the farm in the first place. So the story of the big mare who works very hard its whole life, finally it's too old to work hard anymore. It gets ready to go out to pasture and into retirement, and then it gets taken to the knackery. That's the end of its life. And I'm laughing, but it's actually a truly sad story. That when I first read that book, only last year, funnily enough, it struck me just how serious this is. This is exactly what's happening today. Eventually the music's going to stop. There won't be enough chairs, and it won't be the banksters who miss out. It'll be the average person who has spent their whole life paying their taxes, thinking that eventually they'll get a pension, putting money into superannuation, which they have to in Australia. It's 9%. I think that even might be going up to, 11 or 12% of your income you have to put away into superannuation. This is what's happening today, and people my age, if they think they're going to see a red cent of this money, they're kidding themselves. They've been fooled, and I think if and when people wake up to this, there will be hell to pay, Lindsay.
Yeah. I'll just finish off by, I want to add something to what Ethan said, because I don't know whether they're going to pay it back. They've probably come out now, and if they heard this broadcast, they'll say, no, we've just ceased paying it for a short period to get us over the hump, and then we'll pay it, in 5 years' time or whatever. They'll have a story. But from my experience, that never comes. During my lifetime, they've never got less debt. The only time they get debt is when they sell off our assets. So it's never going to come. I don't see they can ever, even though they'll say they will, I don't see they'll ever make up for those contributions that they've not paid over this coming couple of years. So yeah, just don't believe anything they say. When in doubt, don't trust the government. That's my answer to it all. I'll give it back to you, John.
All right, well, we probably best move on to the fifth topic for today. It does tie in a very direct way. This is to do with the big four banks in Australia facing a $30 billion capital shortfall. Ethan, this is your segment. Before you do take it away, we should just point out, especially for international listeners, in Australia we have four big banks that completely dominate the lending and banking markets. And between the four of them, I mean, okay, how do we put this articulately? These are the big four. There's no fifth competitor that's even close. In fact, during the GFC, some of the smaller banks were bought out by the large banks under the pretense of, well, you know, we need to do this to shore up the security of the big four. So the GFC, our big four banks actually came out the other side stronger because they got to eat up their competitors. When we talk about the big four, we're not messing around. These are the big four banks that rule the roost here in Australia. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And I'll just get straight into the article because it speaks for itself about the big four banks facing a $30 billion capital shortfall. And I'll link to this at AusRoundtable.com as always. Quote, Australia's big four banks face the prospect of raising an additional $30 billion to bring their capital levels into line with the stated demands of the federal government's financial system inquiry. The bank's primary regulator, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, found the Big Four will have to raise their top-tier capital levels by at least 2 percentage points to be comfortably positioned within the top 25% of global banks. Capital requirement refers to the amount of readily accessible money the banks must hold in case of financial turmoil. Globally, the ratio of capital held by major banks has been rising since the global financial crisis laid bare how inadequate the prior levels had been. But the extra security does come at a cost, taking money that would normally be boosting banks' profit out of circulation. Research from broking houses shows APRA's suggested extra buffer amount to be an extra $30 billion, which is roughly equivalent to the existing regulatory capital held by any one of Australia's major banks. The APRA study found Australia's banks' top Tier 1 capital reserves, or CET1 ratio, fell well short of that held by global peers. CET1 refers to the highest quality capital and therefore the most useful to hold in difficult terms. APRA said on average the Australian banks' headline CET1 put them in the middle of the bottom 25% on a global stage, while on another comparison measure they were still placed in the middle of the third quartile, end quote. So in simple terms, our big four banks have to raise $30 billion just to come into line with standards of global banks in terms of capital requirement. Now, I thought I'd bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is obviously the reasons we just spoke about before, about the government not being your friend, about how this is happening. But two is that this isn't a new thing. That is, Australian banks, who often brag about how much capital they have, being in complete turmoil when you look behind the curtain. And I'm sure John can expand on what happened to our banks here at home during the financial crisis when I throw to him, something that most Australians have no idea about. But the second reason I wanted to bring this up was this is exactly what happened when Greece started to go under. The criminal elements of the Goldman Sachs-run EU Greece at the time demanded banks increase their capital requirement with money they didn't have, whilst crippling the economy and the supply of capital to be circulated. And what do we have here at home now? The same thing. Our dollar is trash. And I know some people don't particularly see the connections that I make between Greece and how it's going to affect us here at home. But I do think that this global incremental destabilizing collapse has begun, and it's on the way, and we spoke about this last week, and that's why I wanted to raise this point, but it wasn't exactly for that. And I'll get more into what's happening with Greece later on in the international segment, but I do see the connection there. But the main point was that this is nothing new, and these banks don't have the money, and it's all just a big farce, Jono. So I'll throw over to you. Is there anything you'd like to lead with from this story that I just read out?
Well, we'll talk more about the monetary system, the world monetary system in international when we talk about the Greece bailout. But just briefly, the listeners need to be aware that in Australia, our banks have already been bailed in. And what we mean by this is these Basel III requirements, which say that banks have to have a certain minimum amount of capital reserves on their books. Our banks didn't have that to meet Basel. So what happened was our government bailed them in and essentially issued them with a credit facility at basically zero interest. So instead of the banks having to find the actual capital to make up what they required to meet the requirements, our government simply said, we'll just loan you the money and that can stand as your asset. That's what actually happened. So whereas in the United States, the banks were bailed out when they didn't have the assets to cover their liabilities, in Australia, our banks have been pre-bailed out. They've been bailed in. They don't have the assets to cover the liabilities under these requirements. So our government said, we'll just loan you that money perpetually. I mean, it's incredible stuff. The average Australian has no idea about any of this, and especially for our international listeners, you have to be aware that in this country, the government and the media are all in line saying, oh, our banks are fine, our banks are very secure and they're highly capitalized and we've got good banking regulations and all this kind of nonsense. And 99% of Australians believe all of this. And like the OECD average when it comes to bank lending is that about a third of it goes into real estate and the rest goes into commercial and other endeavors. In Australia, something like 2/3 of the money that's lent out by our banks is lent out into real estate. So the assets backing their lending in the first place is real estate, the housing market. So not only are our banks highly leveraged, and not only are they so leveraged that they need government bail-ins just to meet basic requirements, but the assets that are on their books are twice the OECD average based on real estate. So you can see that if there was a sudden downturn in the real estate market in Australia, our banks would become insolvent in the blink of an eye. And I know that I've used a few terms there and a few concepts that some people might not be familiar with. It took me many hours of studying, both informally and formally at one of their institutions, to get my head around all of these ideas. But the basics are this. You've got assets, you've got liabilities. Basel III requirements say that you need a certain minimum % of assets. Our banks don't have the assets, so our government, our taxpayer, has already issued the credit to try and make up the shortfall. That's a situation that we're in today in Australia. Lindsay, what say you?
Yes, I agree with what you're saying, and on top of that, they're making, I can't give you the exact figures, but I think the last one I heard, the last bank that declared its profit was about 5 billion. So you multiply that by 4, and you're talking in the vicinity of 20 billion that they're pulling out of our country every year. So that just goes out to shareholders or whatever. And then on the television in the evenings, when they have a financial report, they tell you what a wonderful investment banks are. And then you come out and you say, yeah, no, they haven't even got, they can't even meet their liabilities. So this whole thing is a farce. And like you say, they're going to perpetuate it because they can't see what the alternative is. There'll be a huge crash. Real estate will fall over. You know, it'll be a nightmare. So we really are locked into a horrible system that if you and I behave like that, they'd have us before bankruptcy court. So it never ceases to amaze me that the things that these people can get away with that you and I couldn't get away with. I'll leave it at that. There's so much more to this as far as the real estate market, and then you get into securitization where they're not actually loaning us anything. They're getting the money immediately by using our promissory note when we take a mortgage. It just goes on and on and on. There's so much to deal with here, but really the whole thing it's almost like that Wizard of Oz. You know, you're behind the curtain. It's almost like that. It's just smoke and mirrors. I'll see what Ethan's got to say to add to all this.
Yeah, you both raised some fantastic points there, and the article goes on to continue to say that these statistics, the banks refute them, and all of this nonsense, and you can check it out for yourself at Roundtable.com. But this research that APRA did said that $30 billion in capital that they need to have in this capital is the existing regulatory capital held by any one bank. So they need to pretty much double what they have now just to be out of the bottom 25% on a global scale. I mean, this is absolute ridiculous numbers. You know, this is ridiculous. And yet every single day we are told that the banks, they're secure, that they have everything, you know, that they're completely viable for anyone to invest in with the real estate and with everything, you know, government bonds, all of this nonsense. When you actually look at the statistics that have been done by these regulatory bodies, you can see that our banks are in complete turmoil, and we'll talk about it more in the international segment, but I think that is for a reason. But just looking on the surface, John, our banks are completely going downhill, and all the media is doing is telling us that no, we're completely right. It's criminal.
Well, at the risk of contradicting you, I would say that actually after the GFC, our big four banks were major beneficiaries, and I haven't got the figures in front of me right now, but basically we're at the stage where there's only a couple of sectors of our economy that are actually making any money, and one of them is banking. Like banking and lending, the big four banks are all making billions and billions and billions of dollars every year. Their profits are going up, whereas the rest of the economy is stagnating. And if you want to know what a parasite looks like, go and take a look at how the money is being transferred in this country and who's making all the money from it. We'll talk more about that in international, I agree with you. Just quickly, in the live chat, we've got more than 50 people watching live, and Benny B says that he just got back from the bar, and we're streaming live in Canada at 2:03 a.m. 5 new listeners in his kitchen right now. Thanks, Tot, Silver Fox, and John. Thank you, Benny, and we've got 5 new listeners. That's terrific to hear. Hello to you guys out there in Canada. We'll move on to the 6th topic for domestic today. It's to do with a Tongan man who's been given refugee status in this country, Australia, due to being gay. Lindsay, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that. This was in the Courier Mail on page 14 on the 8th of July, and the headline said just that. Gay Tongan wins refuge despite lies. And I'll just read a quick quote. A Tongan national who lied about a child sex conviction in the US and fraud convictions involving false passports has been granted refugee status because he is gay. The Administrative Appeals Tribunal has ruled that his offences were, quote, not particularly serious. So I don't know what you have to do, maybe murder to be serious. After the overturning of a decision by a delegate for the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection to refuse the man a visa on character grounds. AAT Deputy President Stephen Frost said the 40-year-old's freedom in Tonga, where homosexuality is illegal, would be threatened if he was sent back. End of quote. And I really didn't even have a comment about this. There were just so many different levels there that were of concern to me, and I thought I'll just read it out and let people just absorb it themselves, and I'll just see what you fellas. We'll go with you, Jono, if you've got a comment on that, because there just seem to be so many different things there.
Well, this was a fascinating story. I did want to cover it because of, like you said, there's so many elements to it. For those who aren't aware, Tonga is one of the small islands to Australia's east. I guess it's one of the Micronesian countries. I hope I'm using that terminology correctly. We've got plenty of immigrants in Australia from places like Tonga and Samoa and these kinds of places. And in this case, what the article is saying is that there's a man who wants to seek refuge in Australia, who's been caught out lying about his past and the crimes that he's committed, but he's still going to be granted asylum because he's gay, and supposedly that would put him at risk in Tonga. I mean, I almost am at the point where I'm like, is this story actually real? I wanted to do a bit more due diligence to just find out if this is one of those articles that never should have got to print, because it seems too hard to believe. But if it's true, this should be ringing serious alarm bells on a number of levels. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, well, this is just a classic loophole that is being taken advantage of a lot during our refugees and our immigrants that are coming over here. It's a classic example of how human rights have to overturn convictions and criminal histories. It's where the priorities lie with these processes that have gone through. Now, whether the man is gay or not himself, he's used that because his homosexuality is illegal, which would put him at risk. So he's not particularly serious. Quote, end quote, not particularly serious convictions have been overturned because human rights and fundamental human rights overpower that, and that's the way that this loophole is being taken advantage of on a daily basis, and this is just another classic example of that, Jono.
Yeah, I mean, it's not somebody's fault if they're born gay. Most people agree with that, but it's not my fault that I was born to care about the truth, and yet there's many countries on this planet where if I talk about the truth, I can be imprisoned. So does that mean that I get refugee status? Does that mean that people like Brendan O'Connell get refugee status? Well, not his fault. He was just born to speak openly and honestly about Jewish supremacism. He gets imprisoned for that. Does he get refugee status somewhere? I mean, this is absurd stuff that we're hearing. And like I said, I'll do some more due diligence and find out how much validity there is to this article. Because if it is legitimate and it's from a mainstream source, then people ought to be asking some serious questions about what's going on right now, because this change is happening very quickly, and it seems to be happening so quick that some people have been paralyzed, have been numbed, and they're just sitting on the sidelines saying nothing. But we need to start speaking out against this because it's ridiculous. We'll move on to the seventh and final topic for domestic today, and this is a little thing that I've put together. Now, if you go, this is to do with let me start again. The seventh topic today is an update on a Jewish alleged child molester who fled to Israel. Now, back on episode 32 of the ARP, I spent some time detailing the case of Mol Khalifa. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, then I recommend you go back and listen to that segment of episode 32. Remember that we provide timestamps for every one of our episodes to make it easier for you to navigate to the segments that most interest you. Bear in mind also that on episodes 18, 19, and 20 of the ARP, I detailed the revelations stemming from the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sex abuse, specifically to do with how leading figures of the so-called Orthodox Jewish community in Sydney were brazenly covering up alleged child sex abuse by Jewish adults at yeshiva schools. And this is part of a Jewish practice known as Mizara, whereby Jews are apparently forbidden from informing secular authorities on fellow Jews, even when their alleged crimes are committed against Jewish children. Again, all of these episodes are available in MP3 format for free from our website, ozroundtable.com. Now, the basic details of the Leifa case are these. 3 sisters allege that Mrs. Leifa regularly molested them when they were students at the school where Leifa was the principal. The sisters also alleged that their eldest sister was threatened with ostracism from the Jewish community if they did not drop their case. They refused to drop their case, and the eldest sister died at a young age from a heart attack. As soon as allegations regarding molestation against Leifa surfaced, the school committee organised a late-night meeting whereby they bought Leifa a ticket to Israel, and she flew out of Australia hours later, literally hours later. Now, Victorian police are seeking the extradition of Leifa back to Australia to face the charges against her. During the week, there was an update on the case. This is from the ABC, entitled Ex-Principal Accused of Abuse has Extradition Hearing to Australia Delayed, July 16, 2015, quote, a former principal accused of molesting her students at an ultra-Orthodox Jewish school in Melbourne has had her extradition hearing to Australia delayed. The lawyer for Israeli woman Mol Khalifa has told the ABC he is going to fight his client's extradition for years if necessary. Only hours after allegations of sexual abuse first surfaced against Mol Khalifa in 2008, the former Melbourne school principal fled to Israel, and she has been there ever since. Mol Khalifa was first placed under house arrest in Israel last September, but nearly a year later, there still hasn't been an initial hearing on her extradition petition. On Wednesday, Mrs. Leifa's lawyers successfully argued in a Jerusalem court for yet another delay to her case, claiming she is suffering from psychosis and stress. Lawyer Yehuda Fried is representing Mrs. Leifa. He denies dragging the case out. Quote, I don't accept the word excuses. We are conducting a court procedure. The Israeli law confirms that anyone in a psychotic state cannot be subject to legal proceedings. End quote. But he also told reporters outside court that he is willing to spend years fighting the extradition and would appeal all the way up to the Israeli High Court and the Minister for Justice if necessary. Dr. Yitzhak Kadman is the executive director of the Israeli children's right advocacy organization, National Council for the Child. He says, quote, I believe she has very good lawyers, end quote. He is worried Israel's powerful ultra-Orthodox community is protecting Mrs. Leifa and helping to fund her case. Again from Kadman, we are aware of how many people tried to create pressure on this case. We think she is well connected. The prosecutor has told us, without getting into details, that there was a lot of pressure not to even release her name. In a statement, the Israeli Ministry of Justice told the ABC that there has been a number of delays to this case caused by the defendant. The ministry is doing everything it can to move this along. Mol Khalifa's case has been adjourned until October 26, end quote. So, basically, her lawyers are openly admitting that they will drag the case out as long as they can to avoid extradition, and those in the know are saying that the Orthodox Jewish community is funding Leifa's legal team, and now the case has been adjourned another 3 months. Those who recall my coverage of these matters in early episodes will note that this is not an isolated case. The Royal Commission revealed that the most senior figures of the Orthodox Jewish community in Australia were involved in exactly these kinds of cover-ups. The vast majority of Gentile Australians are oblivious to concepts like Mizara, and with the big 6 media corporations in America almost entirely controlled by Jews, it is fair to surmise that most Gentiles across the world who get so much of their information from the mainstream media would be oblivious as well. So the question is, how many of our listeners will do their own research, familiarize themselves with concepts like Messiah, and pass this information on to those around them? And which ones will pretend that this isn't important and completely ignore it like a good little goyim they are? Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. This isn't just isolated to this. There have been lots of cases in America and from Russia as well, where Jews have done a runner back to Israel to escape justice, and fought through the courts against extradition. So it's a tried and true tactic they use, and I'm not surprised about that at all. But I am surprised that the Orthodox Church would be backing her. I would have thought there'd be somebody in amongst the Orthodox who'd be looking after the interests of their own children. That's really has, it's not just today, but that surprised me about this whole series that you've spoken of, that came through to me, that they just prepared to look after the adults and not care about what they've done to their own children. I find it a bit staggering. I'll see what Ethan's got. Ethan, have you got a comment on this?
Yeah, I agree, Lindsay. That's what I took out of that was the most shocking part for me. And as we've seen, as John has brought up, it's right out in front of you. You know, you can coax the connections right down to the T just by using mainstream articles. And unfortunately, a lot of situations like this, these people do use the legal system to hide behind by adjourning cases, by dragging it out, by appealing. It's a very long process, and that's where the legal system has another negative fall, not to mention the corrupt elements that could be involved and all of this nonsense that's happening. But right there in front of you, you have misjustice that's being reported in the mainstream media, and no one's doing anything against it because this legal system is protecting them. I think that there should be some sort of loophole that can speed this up or that can make it happen, because people, not just in this case, should not be able to hide behind these sorts of things and not be able to hide behind these lobby groups and these special interests and these legal proceedings that really are getting in the way of justice, Jono.
Oh, look, for me, this isn't about the legal process. This is about the cultural process. Again, if people go back and listen to those episodes, they will learn that the school that this Mal Khalifa was the principal of, the school committee, as soon as the allegations against Khalifa surfaced, they organised a late-night committee meeting that night. They got one of their friends who happened to own a travel agency. They got her to open up the agency late at night so they could use the computers to book a ticket to put Khalifa on a plane to Israel that morning. She was out of the country on her way to Israel within hours. I mean, this is incredible stuff. And why are they doing it? Like I said, because of this concept of Messiah, whereby Jews don't inform on fellow Jews to secular authorities, and if they do, they risk ostracism. And this all came out in the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sex Abuse earlier in the year. Prior to, what was that, February when this all came out? Prior to that, I, for one, had no idea about this concept of Messiah. I'll put to you that the vast majority of Australians have no idea about this concept of Messiah. But it's a very important thing to understand that there is a group, an ethno-religious group in this country, who have a policy whereby if one of them gets caught doing the wrong thing, they're not allowed to report to secular authorities at risk of being ostracized. Their leading figures are involved in all of this. The information's all there. I put together my pieces based on the different pieces of the puzzle that I could put together from the mainstream media. So none of what I'm saying is from conspiracy websites or supremacist websites or anything like that. This is just what I managed to put together by taking a little piece from this mainstream article, a piece from that mainstream article, because you see what the mainstream media will never do is put all of the pieces together for you. I'll give you a tidbit here and a tidbit there, but if you want to understand the bigger picture, you have to do it yourself. Go through all the articles, find the name in one article, find the name in the other article, find all the pieces of information that are relevant, put it all together for yourself, and then you realize this is actually going on right now. There's a group of people who have a lot of power in our society, and they have an overt policy of do not report on fellow Jews, even when they get caught doing the wrong thing, even when they're committing their alleged crimes against Jewish children. And that's the issue here. Those three sisters that allege that Mal Khalifa molested them, they were all Jewish girls attending a Jewish school. So this doesn't just affect non-Jews. This actually affects their own community. It's incredible stuff. people need to be aware of it. And the reason why I would put to you guys that most people aren't aware of this concept of Messiah is because that most people have no idea how the Jewish community works, because that's not what the media talks about. And then when you understand who controls the big six media companies in America, you'll start to get some idea of why that is, and people need to be aware of this. Now, some people will say, oh, well, the Jewish community had to develop these policies, over hundreds or thousands of years because they were always persecuted or whatever. Well, that may be the case. That may not be the case. Do your own research and find it out. But even if that is the case, that they have a perfectly logical reason for not informing on each other and for helping each other to flee the country when allegations against them arise, even if you think they've got a perfectly logical reason for doing that, it's still important that the rest of the community understands that, so that they can make their own better decisions when these kinds of things take place. And people have to understand the wealthiest families in Australia today are Jewish. The people who control the big six media corporations in America today, it's almost completely controlled by Jewish people. They even openly brag about it. So this is important. It's very relevant. And this isn't about saying that Jews are good people or bad people or anything like that. This is about saying that there is a group within this country very powerful, and they happen to have a policy called Messiah, which affects the way that they deal with the legal and police systems in this country, and every Australian deserves to know that. And if they would ever come for me and try and call me an anti-this or a white that or whatever for what I'm saying, that should tell you what their agenda is. They don't want you to know. They want to try and stop people like me from talking about this, and there's a reason why they're doing that. Ask yourself what that might be. Do your own research. Go to ozroundtable.com. Look at the links for yourself. Read them for yourself. Go and do your own research for yourself. Think about this. Spend time thinking about it, coming up in your own mind with what's really going on. That's the most important thing. I don't expect anyone to believe me based on what I'm saying right here, right now. They shouldn't. They should go and do their own research, find out for themselves what's really going on, and then once they've got their own mind around all of this, then they can go on spreading this information to others. It's important that we do that because, like I said, the mainstream media will tell you the truth about this thing or about that thing, but they won't connect the dots for you. You have to do that for yourself, and I implore people to go and do that. But we do need to move on to the international segment for today. The first topic for international actually ties in with all this really well. It's to do with a 94-year-old accountant who has been imprisoned for his part in the so-called Holocaust. Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, g'day. This came out of the Courier Mail on page 27 on the 16th of July, so it's a mainstream story. And the headline read, Holocaust accountant sent to jail. And I'll quote, the pronunciation might not be correct, but it's Lüneburg, Germany. A German court last night sentenced a former Nazi SS officer known as, quote, the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, end of quote, to 4 years jail in what was expected to be one of the last Holocaust trials. And the man was 94 years old, and he's to serve 4 years jail. So it's virtually a death sentence. That's what basically it amounts to. And just one of the things that came through from the series of articles you were going on with in the past about these sex offenders in Australia was that how others kept calling for mercy for them. Show them mercy, or they don't deserve to be jailed for lengthy periods, etc., etc. And it just, when I read this article, it just struck me. So they've got a double standard. They want mercy for their own people when they commit crimes against children, but here's a 94-year-old man who was a bookkeeper of all things. He wasn't involved with anything to do with any Holocaust, even if there was a Holocaust. There's so many ifs here, and they've sentenced him to 4 years jail. And it ties in with this thing of never forgive, never forget, which is apparently a fairly common Jewish trait that they hold as part of their belief system. Never forgive, never forget. And yet they want that for themselves. That's the thing that upsets me, I think. So this typical hypocrisy had made me think that this is probably why they're excuse me. This is probably why they're so they're so little thought of in many parts of the world, because their belief system offends the normal belief system of the peoples throughout the world in many places. And that's probably, we talk about how they claim they've been picked on down through the centuries, and it may well be this that's caused it. The native peoples in the countries they've gone to really find this sort of hypocrisy irritating, annoying, and They just don't like it. So that's me getting a bit off my chest. So I'll wait and see what Ethan. If you've got a comment on this, Ethan, I'd like to hear what you've got to say as well.
I don't have too much to expand on it, Lindsay. I think you said it all. It's terrible to see a 94-year-old man who was a bookkeeper 70 years ago, if you know, in the Auschwitz facility there, and then gets sentenced to 4 years jail 70 years after the war. And you mentioned the hypocrisy that's there. Of course, the hypocrisy is there, and it's going to continue to be there long after all of this is done and dusted, and is continued to be drilled into the minds of the people. So we definitely need to keep bringing up and drilling it, the counterproductive argument into the minds of the people, John.
Well, from what I've read, there are thousands of people in Germany today, as we speak, who are in prison for saying the wrong things about the wrong historical events and the wrong group of people. And people have to understand this is what's happening today. And in the live chat, there are some people saying that they like that I bring up some of the topics that I bring up, but apparently I don't talk enough about the Jews' planned theft every 7 years. Well, I don't know about this planned theft every 7 years. What I do know is that there aren't many outlets in Australia, mainstream, alternative, or independent, who will recommend that you go and do your own research, go and read the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, go and read what they say about stopping the Gentiles who wake up to the scam and keeping the dumb Goyim working, because most of the Goyim are so dumb they won't understand what's happening. I mean, I recommend people not listen to what I say. I recommend they go and do their own research, and they'll see that this is all going to plan. And right now we've got a 94-year-old man apparently going to prison for his part in something that supposedly happened 70 years ago. But anybody who has watched Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, a documentary that you can get for free on the internet, I'll repeat that, Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, anybody who's watched that documentary for themselves knows that this 94-year-old man is going to prison for crimes that he simply did not commit because they were not committed. So people say that I don't talk about this stuff enough. Well, okay, then you tell me where I can find people in Australia talking about this, because I'd love to hear it. I had to learn all of this stuff for myself. I had to go and do my own research, find out that I was wrong about just about everything that I thought that I knew about World War II history in particular. And that's how I got to the point where I'm at right now. So if there's someone else who is telling you guys everything you need to know about Jewish supremacism and the effect that it has on this country and others, please tell me where I can go to listen to them, because I had to get to this stage pretty much all by myself. We need to move on to the second topic for International today. Bit of a change of pace, Ethan, is to do with the Twitter joining the global plan to control the flow of news. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And this is a very interesting development this week, and one I'm particularly intrigued with. And this is to follow on from a discussion we had a few months ago about a deal between Facebook and various news platforms to internalize the flow of news into the Facebook server. And I'll recap on all of that in a second, but right now there's a new development in this saga, and this time it is Twitter who is jumping into the spiderweb. Now, I've got an article in front of me that was published yesterday in the Business Insider entitled, "Twitter wants to become your go-to source for news," and I'll read it out right now. Quote, "To increase the number of users who visit the site for news content, Twitter released a new feature this week that highlights tweets from news publishers," TechCrunch reports. "The feature replaces URL links with a card-like format that displays brief summaries of stories and an enhanced image. Many users already flock to the digital media platform news site for access. 63% of Twitter users receive their news from social media sites, up to 52% in 2013, according to new data published by Pew Research Center. The added visual attention to publishers' tweets hopes to attract users to news articles and ultimately drive them. News publishers will benefit from the new published tweet in two essential ways. First, publishers could decrease their reliance on Facebook for referral traffic, and the article goes on to just talk about the news format, and it's really just another article that's spewing out the same repetitive garbage. And I'll just end it there, but for some of these people who may not be aware of what's going on, reading this article may not be a big deal, but as I've explained previously on the program, internalizing news like this has some pretty dire consequences. As some of the statistics in the article I just read out mentioned, and as I've documented my experiences at the Walkley Foundation's journalism talks when I attended, Most people rely on social media for their news and information, as opposed to those who directly type in a website to search for today's stories. What Facebook and Twitter are proposing is to capitalize on this, internalizing the story so you don't have to click an external URL. And this is a concern because Facebook, in particular, already has an algorithm to manipulate what you see in your newsfeed. And long story short, eventually, if it all goes to plan, this means the formation of a singular hub of information that is completely fed to users, whilst any alternative information or information not involved in agreements is no longer seen. That's essentially what's being done here. Now, we have broken this down before in extensive details, so I'll leave a link at ozroundtable.com for everyone to check out for themselves. But Lindsay, once again, these social networks, as we've said before, which many people rely on for just about everything today, who were originally created and incorporated with agencies like the CIA, are continuing the move to grasp any information from slipping, and now Twitter is on board trying to internalize news. And if they can try to get this proposed agreements through with news companies, it could be very dire. I'm interested to get your thoughts on this again.
Yeah, well, I don't have very much to do with any of these social media things, because exactly what you just said. I've had this horrible fear that it was CIA backed, and then when this young fella, Rockefeller's grandson, took over Facebook, that made it, like a cinch. You know that they're doing no good. Just the nature of Rockefeller. So I don't trust anything they do. I don't have anything to do with them at all possible. But once again, we come back to the vast numbers of people who do get involved with it. So many times somebody, say to them, have you got a website? Oh, here's my Facebook site. No, I don't go on there. So there are lots and lots of people who are using it for everything. And it does worry me that once they corner the market, exactly what you just said, if people don't pay to have their information put on there, they'll get locked out. So it'll just become, it's bad enough as it is. Nearly all the news now comes through AAP or one of these other Jewish-owned news sources. It'll just become even worse and locked in. And like I keep thinking to myself again, I've only got however many years, 30 years or whatever, if I'm lucky. And then this group now that are using all these social networks, they'll be the senior adults in society, and they will have been trapped into it. And it'll be very difficult for them to throw it off. And even when we try and explain what's going on, they're not. Once they're using something, it's going to be very difficult to get them to throw off the shackles. So it is a worry to me. I don't know what we can do about it. I think in some ways one of the positive things that came from my kids was that a lot of them and their friends are starting to get sick of Facebook, but I'm just worried that there'll be another one come up, to take its place. So I'll see what you've got to say about any of that, Ethan.
Yeah, you make some good points there, Lindsay. The reason why this is major news is because, to me in particular, is because they don't need to introduce internet censorship laws if they just do this, if they just incrementally incorporate it into one hub of information. Now, it's going to eventually morph to a point where if you want news, you're going to have to be a part of these websites. If you want internet, you're going to have to be signed up to Facebook. If you want all these things, it's going to be introduced. That's the foreseeable future that I see. And once you've got it on there, it starts with one company. Facebook started with the New York Times. Then they're going to prioritize their videos and their media, which will be internalized in the Facebook feed, which then brings the other competitors over because they understand that the majority of social media is the majority of the traffic that comes through. So then they come over, and then it just evolves and evolves and evolves until everything's internalized. And the already struggling alternative media on social media websites like this are completely buried because they're not a part of it. They don't have information that's appropriate for the algorithm. And right there, that just sets up a completely controlled and manipulated feed of news that they want people to hear. That gets to a point where information like this is going to be impossible to get out. So we need to identify it in its early stages, Jono.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I get where you're going with this. You're saying that the path that they're on, eventually they'll have complete control of the flow of information, so people like us can't get our information out there. I can see it going that way as well, perhaps. In the meantime, though, I don't think they really have to go that far. All they need to do is to control the minds of the masses, of the majority. And so even though there are outlets like our show and other people doing shows similar to this, what's important is that those first 2 or 3 headlines that come up on Facebook, or the first 2 or 3 feeds that come up on someone's Twitter feed or whatever, they're the important ones, because most people don't look any further than that. And if you need proof of this, just go and ask the average person on the street, like, what's making news at the moment. They will remember the first and last thing they've heard, and not much more than that. So this doesn't even need to be taken as far as complete control of information. All it needs to be is centralized to the point where the majority are all getting the same messages. And we're already at that point. I think what we're seeing now is a centralization, a consolidation in the internet sphere, whether it's with Facebook or Twitter or Google or YouTube or whatever, a consolidation there so that even on those platforms, it's a centralized message that's getting out to the masses. And I think to a large extent, it's already working. And that's why with issues such as vaccination, the vast majority of people, whether they get their information from Channel 7 at the 6 p.m. news when they get home and cook their dinner, or they read Yahoo 7 at work, or they have a Twitter feed and they're subscribed to one of the morning sunrise people's Twitter feed, whatever it is, you can see how these people are all getting the same message and they're all thinking the same way. And it's classic crowd psychology. It's Gustav Le Bon 101. This is just how they're doing it, and I think they're doing it very successfully, Ethan.
Yeah, I agree, Jono. And the problem is they still want to capitalize on that more. You know, I still think that they're trying to continue more, because at least those people that are subscribed to a Twitter feed, they have the option if someone tells them go to ozroundtable.com. You know, they have the option, go to the newyorktimes.com, whatever their website is. Now there won't be a newyorktimes.com website. It will be in Facebook. You know, this is what they're proposing, and this is what has read out in the plans and the terms and conditions that I read out in my feature piece, which I'll link to at ozroundtable.com. They're essentially talking about the abolishment of their websites. And once a hub of information becomes so powerful like that, it's going to be almost impossible to stop on the internet. So if I did have a final thought, is right now we need to, as Lindsay said, people are getting sick of Facebook, and there are alternatives out there. Support shows like this, support websites like informedplanet.org, support alternative social media sites with informed people, with critical thinkers. If everyone abandons the ship now, then they're not going to be successful with this, and this is what we need to do. It's fairly early stages, so we have a great chance to identify and stop it now, and this is why we're trying to spread information like this while we can, because they don't want information like this getting out, and one day they do have a vision to stop it, and if I have my way, and if we have our way as a community, as a grassroots collective activism network, whatever you want to call it, we will stop it straight in its tracks, Jono.
Yeah, well, look, we'll talk about this more in the after show, I suppose, but the point is that we do have a platform right now. You, I, and Lindsay can get together on Google Hangout, broadcast live to the world. We've got more than 50 people watching live right now. We'll probably get many hundreds, possibly 1,000 listens by the end of next week to the show. That's the platform that's available to us right now, and if people like yourself are correct, Ethan, and they're going to try and eventually take that away from us, it makes it all the more important that we utilize this facility while we still have it. So I always encourage people, if you think the show that we're doing here with the Oz Roundtable is worth your time to listen to, well, guess what? There are probably people who would like to listen to you if you did something similar. So while you've got the chance to utilize it, utilize it. It's not that hard. Get in touch with us. We'll tell you what we know about using this facility to make it easier for you when you transition into starting doing your shows. You have a voice. You have a way to get your voice out there. You might not always have that function available to you. Why not use it while you can? We'll talk more about that in the after show if you're cool with that, Ethan. We'll move on to the third topic for today. It's to do with Donald Trump, the presidential candidate. Lindsay, it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. This is a double bunger because it's like two sides of the same story. The first one I'll start off with from the Anti-Defamation League website, the ADL website, and it was on the 15th of July. And the headline said, "White supremacists view Donald Trump as champion of disaffected whites." And I'll give you a quote. It's a relatively long quote, so anyway, just bear with me. Donald Trump's bigoted remarks about Mexican immigrants, his subsequent jump in the polls, and his ability to attract thousands of people to a campaign event in Arizona caught the attention of white supremacists. Eager to exploit the situation, some white supremacists are hailing Trump as a champion of disaffected whites who are angry about non-white immigration and cultural changes. On July the 13th, neo-Nazi Andrew Anglin wrote an article on the Daily Stormer, the virulently racist and anti-Semitic site he runs, which praises Trump for his comments on Mexicans. Anglin asserted, quote, "The Trump train has left the station and is running non-stop to total victory over the barbarian hordes of Mexico. Because there is one issue which matters beyond all other issues, and that is the invasion of white countries by non-whites," end of quote. Anglin adds that, quote, "The amount of good," quote, "that Trump has done is immeasurable." Writing also on July the 13th, Peter Brimelow, who runs the racist anti-immigrant site VDare, attacked cultural Marxist, often a code word for Jews, for rebuking Trump's remarks and shutting down the immigration debate. Brimelow compares the reaction to Trump to the negative reaction to the Confederate flag. Brimelow then implies that the mainstream media elite that has rejected Trump's views is mostly made up of Jews in New York. And that's the end of the quote from the ADL website. And that's pretty much what you could expect from an ADL website. The next one was from Henry Macau, and he also is a Jew, my understanding anyway, from his website on the 15th of July. And the headline said, "Zionists use Donald Trump to fix another election." Quote, "Like a turd that won't flush, Donald Trump is back again to serve his Illuminati Jewish masters. This time around, his role is to win the GOP nomination and throw the election to Hillary Clinton, the Illuminati bankers' preferred candidate. If this seems far-fetched, consider that Trump is allegedly leading the other GOP candidates by a large margin. He catapulted into the lead by pretending to champion ordinary Americans who are fed up with illegal immigration. Calling Mexicans rapists is a little extreme, but he needed to get attention fast. The Illuminati Jewish bankers have a long history of manipulating US presidential elections. An obvious example is when they dusted off Theodore Roosevelt in 1912 to split the Republican vote, defeat Taft, and elect their pawn, Woodrow Wilson. His David Axelrod, and in brackets aka Handler, is another Illuminati Jew by the name of Michael Cohen. He is a Trump advisor again in 2015, saying Trump speaks for the silent majority. Cohen supported Obama in 2008, but has grown disappointed with the president. So much so that he now describes himself as offended by the administration's agenda. America, Cohen said, has become a third world nation, echoing words that have also become familiar refrain from Trump's. Now, when we talk about the number of times that they've split the Republican vote so that they can get the Democrat in or whatever, and I just quoted the one there about Wilson, but he gives about 4 or 5 at his website. So just the size of these quotes from these articles, I've had to cut down. But if you go into it, the same with the one from the ADL, they don't just concentrate on VDare and the Daily Stormer. They've got article after article about people who have found this interesting. Now, the reason I brought this up was I thought this was just, it was of interest to me, so I thought, well, maybe our listeners may be interested as well, that you've got two completely different sides to the same to the same man, and I thought that was interesting. And I don't know which is true, and both of them may be true to some degree. I know in the Henry Macau site, he has a picture of Trump standing there giving a Masonic signal. So you know, there's more to this behind the scenes than what I've given in this article. But Ethan, have you heard any of this before? Of either of these sides about Trump?
I certainly have, Lindsay. I've been following Trump's campaign since he announced it, because I've been very interested, because I always take interest in the US presidential elections to see what's happening, and at the moment I'm almost, majority of me is convinced that he is being used as the controversial tool to take the heat off of Hillary Clinton and her appalling record for her to get elected and then, you know, rein in whatever terrible things that she has in plan as the puppet that they are wanting to do. But it's very interesting with Trump, and people might call me a bit naive for having a little bit of optimism inside of me, but the media have been demonizing him profusely since he started his campaign. So I did a bit of research into it, and all of his immigration quotes that he said in his speech were completely taken out of proportion. He was talking about illegal immigrants when he referred to rapists and murderers, and in his interview with Fox or NSNBC, one of those news programs, he brought out the Homeland Security statistics to back up those claims and was talking about how the Mexican government willingly send them over to the US and the US let them in as a way for this crime syndicate cartel operation that they have to continue. So that was very interesting. And then Donald Trump has been bringing up, he's been demonizing almost everyone, and he's been talking a lot of stuff that I tend to agree with on a large extent. Now, I'm not saying that I'm sitting here thinking that Donald Trump's the big savior to come along. No, I think that he is controlled. But in the meantime, he's saying some good things that are getting out there. You know, he led the charge to discover Obama's real birth certificate when they released it, and it was the fake one on the website. And he said that again in the interview. He said, the reporter asked him, "How can we trust your statistics about Mexicans when you believed in Obama's birth certificate?" And he said, "Well, if you want to believe that that's real, then that's your problem. I say it's completely fake." And he was talking about China trade deals, how he doesn't want China to destroy America anymore. Jon Stewart was demonizing him on The Daily Show, calling him something F-face, and then Trump came out on Twitter saying, "You might call me something F-face, but at least I didn't change my name from a Jewish name," and started saying that, why aren't you proud of your heritage? Why did you change your name? You know, what was the purpose of that? So it was extremely interesting things coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, and a lot of things that I agree with. And John, I don't know if you've looked much into Trump's campaign, but it's very surprising and it's enjoyable to watch because he is saying a lot of truth. But at the end of the day, I still think he's part of the entire scam there. But interesting times in the presidential campaign so far.
I'll openly admit that I haven't looked into Trump's presidential campaign at all. In fact, when I got Lindsay's agenda through this morning, that was the first I'd heard that he was doing as well as he is. I kind of miss the days back when I used to believe that these people with big media profiles, I miss the days when I believed that they might actually be legitimate and they might actually care about me and the rest of the peasants. But now that I know better, I'm sitting here thinking Trump, Bush, Clinton, these are all just contestants on a reality TV show, and it's just that the winner of this one gets to pretend for the next 4 to 8 years that they're the president of the United States. It's the same thing. It's the same as people who support their favorite contestant in MasterChef, and it's like, oh, I hope that Mark gets through this week. You know, last week his Parmesan, it didn't go down well with the judges. Well, it's no different to supporting Trump or Bush or Clinton. It's a circus, and that's my opinion. That's why I don't pay attention to it anymore. But it is interesting to hear what you and Lindsay have to say about what Trump's been saying. I found it interesting there, Lindsay, you were talking about the Daily Stormer being derided as a virulent racist website. Have you checked out the Daily Stormer yourself in the past?
A long time ago. I haven't looked at it for a long time, yeah. But it wasn't just... The other thing, too, the ADL said was that I found was that that cultural Marxist is a code word for Jews. And my first reaction was, well, if the cat fits, bloody wear it. You know, that was anyway. Sorry, I digress. I'll go back to you.
That's why I check out the Daily Stormer from time to time, because if you want good info with a positive spin about cultural Marxism, the Daily Stormer is as good a place as any on the net to find it. The problem is that the Daily Stormer pretends as though, like that Charleston shooting, they pretended as though the Charleston shooting was real. Like they bought right into it. They just went down the path of, you know, oh, look, this white guy who killed all these people, you know, he just had mental problems. Maybe he had too many medications or whatever. And it's like, why are you pretending that media story was real in the first place? Which leads me to question whether maybe Andrew Anglin is actually on our side, or who is he trying to appeal to? I'm not sure. But I would recommend the listeners, if you haven't checked out Daily Stormer before, dailystormer.com, go and check it out. Make up your own mind. You might like the material they put out. You might dislike it, but he, Anglin, at least on the surface, is exercising his constitutional rights to express his opinions, and thank God that some people do have those rights, written into their constitution. We don't have that here in Australia, so we're probably not quite as at liberty to speak what we think. But go and check it out, Daily Stormer. Make up your own mind. A virulent, a virulent racist website. Very amusing. Ethan, any thoughts on this?
Going back to the original Trump story, I know a lot of people in the chat have said I'm naive for my comments, and no, I'm not saying that I, for a second, believe that Donald Trump isn't part of this whole scam as well. It's the same thing happened with Rand Paul. Rand Paul came out and was spitting so much truth out there, was criticizing Obama, was doing all the right things, and he did a complete 180 and supported Obama. It's what they do, but the good thing is a lot of the topics that he is talking about are the truth, and I see the positive aspect of Americans being able to talk about this, about the destruction of their infrastructure through China trade deals, through illegal immigrants and the criminal funding of the cartels that the US government does. All of these things, Obama's fake birth certificate, the way that the media manipulate and take things out of context, these issues that Trump are talking about are positive, and because he's getting them out there, people are starting to talk about it. So that's where I see the positive in it, not in the man himself. And I'm still looking to see where he goes with this, but I do believe he is a distraction for Hillary Clinton to get in. He's supposed to be the one to take the heat off of Hillary Clinton, but you never know, and I'm always going to keep an open mind. But I took a positive spin on it just due to the fact that the topics he was talking about, no matter who's talking about them, it's good to see them being discussed in America, and I'll leave it at that, John.
John Miller in the live chat says, misdirection and misinformation from mainstream media with regards to Trump. And Chanced Warrior says, Judge Judy for president, she knows the truth, can't fix anything in a democracy, sad but true. Judge Judy is, of course, a member of the tribe. They don't tend to put themselves forward as president. They tend to prefer to pull the strings from behind the scenes, but we can talk more about that in the after show. Lindsay, this is your segment. I'll give you the final say, and then we'll press on.
Yeah, well, I really wasn't buying into any of it. I just brought it out because it was almost like opposing points of view, and I found them both interesting. So that's the reason I brought it up. So that's all I've got to add to it.
Well, we'll move on to the fourth and final topic for international then. This is to do with the circus of the oligarchs. Greece signed new bailout deal. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Now, over the last 2 weeks on this program, I've chronicled the current financial situation in Greece from a number of standpoints, and we've given our thoughts from a variety of perspectives on the subject. Now, if you go back to last week's show, I give an in-depth look at how Greece was manipulated by global banking oligarchs after the financial collapse of 2008, and how this led to the country's current situation. Now, when I was reading this last week, we had just got word that the people of Greece had voted no to further austerity measures and gave an outline of what their future projection may be in regards to their current debt. Now, as I mentioned in episode 39, I was anticipating that the polls will be rigged to further serve the interests of the EU puppet masters, because Greece dropping out of the Eurozone would cause a world of troubles. Now, this wasn't the case exactly, and I'm the first to admit that I was wrong about that aspect in particular. But I do have an update this week which does confirm that the sham is going to continue to go on despite the Democratic votes. Now, I've got an article in front of me entitled Eurozone Crisis, Greece Caves into EU Creditors with Yes to Spending Cuts a New Deal. Quote, the Greek Prime Minister has signed to European Union creditors and proposed 3 years of severe spending cuts in return for a mountain of cash that would save the country from bankruptcy and Eurozone exit. It comes just days after Greece overwhelmingly voted no to an EU-backed deal, which some critics have now claimed was not as harsh than the new deal put forward by the Prime Minister. The leader has asked creditors for 53.5 billion euro of cash and completely caved in on what he had previously described as red lines, including a cut to the special VAT discount for Greek islands, popular with tourists, and an increase to the state pension age. Today, the Prime Minister urged his ruling party to remain united and to back the new proposals. He said, We are confronted with crucial decisions. We got a mandate to bring a better deal than the ultimatum that the Eurogroup gave us, but certainly not given a mandate to take Greece out of the Eurozone. We are all in this together, end quote. So if we take a step back there, Greece, a country who received a short end of the stick following the financial crisis in a situation they didn't cause by a government of banksters appointed without democratic approval, now going against the overwhelming response of the public to refuse a new deal, have entered into yet another crippling bailout deal with the EU, and this time is really going to hit them hard, and it's heartbreaking to see for the people of Greece. Now, I'm not going to get into the bailout deal itself because I don't want to bore the listeners too much, but just to let people know the extent and the appalling nature of the new bailout terms, let me read out an article I have in front of me by Time entitled Greece May Have to Sell Islands and Ruins Under Its New Bailout Deal from July 13th. Quote, of all the aspects of Monday's bailout deal that Greeks found humiliating, nothing drilled into their sense of pride quite like the government's promise to sell off valuable Greek assets to the tune of 50 billion euros. The 7-page agreement, which European leaders trashed out over the weekend, made no mention of where Greece is supposed to find that property to sell, but as they scrambled for options, officials in Athens saw no way around the blood-curdling prospect of auctioning off Greek islands, nature preserves, and even ancient ruins. It's an affront, says a strategist and advisor to the Greek Ministry of Labour, Social Security, and Social Solidarity. It's basically saying, sell the memory of your ancestors, sell your history, just so we can get something commercial from it, he tells Time on Monday. This is an idea to humiliate Greeks. The idea of locking up Greek assets in special funds emerged on Saturday from Germany, the biggest and one of the least forgiving of the credited nations involved in the talks. In order to guarantee repayment on loans in Greece, the German finance minister even suggested moving the titles to Greek assets to an external fund in Luxembourg so that Athens could not get back their sales, end quote. And I don't even have to add anything to that to add emphasis on the situation. I mean, Greece are really in for it this time, and I don't see where this is going to end up because austerity never works. It's a flawed concept designed to fail, much like the zombie economic system that has enslaved the nation of Greece in the first place. And Lindsay, after all that, it seems like the circus within the EU will continue on just as we predicted it would. You know, we looked at, are they going to bail out of the Eurozone and whatnot, and I said it might play into the hands of them, but they're going to have to rig it so they don't. And now the crook Prime Minister in Greece has just turned his back on the overwhelming support of the referendum that they had, and the problem that I have is this is eventually going to end up here, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on where this situation's going from here now that Greece are stuck in the circus once again.
Yeah, okay. I tend to agree with you there. I don't think it's going to end well for anybody. It's not just Greece. I mean, they usually rattle out to Portugal, Spain, Italy, Ireland, you know, and I think it goes worse than that. I think it's Britain, and I think it's France, and I think it'll be Germany. You know, the whole thing is being organised to be taken down. Now you just have to look into Australia. They have these World Heritage areas, and when you look at them, they're just timber. So they're locking up this timber, and then they'll do a debt for equity swap, which is basically what you're talking about here, isn't it? They're going to sell the ruins and the holiday islands and what have you in a debt for equity swap, and that's what they've been doing here for a long time now. They bring in politicians who get us, well, they don't get us, but they pretend they get us deeply in debt, and then they've got to sell public assets to get themselves out of it. Now, we had this a few years ago where they were doing that. Oh yeah, it's all done now. We've paid off all the debt. And then you get another Labor government came in and got us even deeper again. And so we've got to go through the whole procedure again so that you finish up with no assets at all that actually belong to the people. Now, eventually we're going to have a gutful of that. We're going to have a peasants' revolt. We're going to clean the lot of them up, and we'll take our assets back. But we know what happened in Germany when they tried to do that. They then bring other countries in and gang up on them. So it's not far-fetched to suggest that what's happening in Greece could happen to all of us, because I think it's already happening to us. It just hasn't come to a head here, and eventually I think it will. I don't know what to add to that. I remember when John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember thinking they got away with that, and nobody even. I mean, they had a bit of an inquiry, which was a Clayton's inquiry. But you can bet your life that all the presidents and prime ministers of every country in the world got the message. It's the carrot or the stick. So take the carrot because you won't like the stick. Because look what they've done to Kennedy. And we had our own bloke here. Harold Holt went swimming off the shores in Victoria, and you can bet your life that wasn't an accident either, because he was talking about going it alone on money. And the big boys won't like that. So, yeah, I agree with you there. But anyway, having said all that, I'll throw it over to Jono and just see if he might have a different take on all this.
Well, I did sort of go into some detail last week about why I think that the people who focus too much on the so-called Greek debt, like the debt crisis and the monetary crisis, sometimes I think they focus too much on the trees and not enough on the forest. The way that I see it is, what we're seeing in Greece right now is that the national assets are being sold off to the vampires, to the parasites. They're going to take over ownership of these assets. This is happening, whether it's happening fast or slow, in countries right across the world. You look at Australia today, many people think that under Prime Minister John Howard, somehow Australia was paying down debt and saving money. That's nonsense. All we did was sell off national assets. That's the only thing that happened, was that we were selling off things that we all used to own. And that's going to continue to happen, whether it seems like things are worse in Greece or better in Australia or whatever the case may be. The reality is that the people who used to own so much of what they use are owning less and less and less. They're going further into personal debt. Their countries are going further into national debt. And it all goes back to one group. Whether you think that it's the Jesuits who run the world, or you think it's the Jews who run the world, or you think it's some other group who run the world, the reality is that we, the peasants, are having less and less power, getting further and further into debt, getting taxed more and more and more, and there's some group who are benefiting. And I can't claim to know exactly who they are, but who they are at the moment isn't the most important thing. What's important is that most of the people around us, especially in this country, who watch their TV, who trust their newspapers, they think that things are okay. They're roughly okay. Things aren't getting too much worse, but it's clear to anyone who does the research that things are getting significantly worse for people all around the country, and what's happening in Greece is just one of the more extreme examples of it. But I personally wouldn't get too caught up focusing on what's happening in Greece, because to me, like I said, it's just an extreme example of what's happening all around the world. And when Lindsay talks about what they did under the Hitler administration in Germany, people, if you're not already aware, you need to go and research what happened in 1933. The Hitler administration was elected democratically. Very quickly, Judea declared war on Germany. This was published in leading newspapers in England. Judea declares war on Germany. Then later in 1933, we saw the Havara Agreement. A lot of what we were told about the Hitler administration are outright lies and fabrications. We're not told the real truth, that someone came along, he had a better vision of how money could be used for public benefit, and the public did benefit, and that's why he had to be taken out. And if we had just enough people in our country today, we could fix things very quickly. But so long as they're in a trance from television, mainstream media, and public school indoctrination, it's very unlikely they could even listen to what I just said without getting angry, frothing at the mouth, just like they've been trained to do, just like the Pavlovian dogs they are. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, that's well said, Jono. And for me, obviously take a different approach to that, and to expand a little bit on it, as I mentioned earlier, with the capital reform here in Australia, the $30 billion capital, that's exactly what happened as Greece started to begin to collapse. The holes started to go there, and this is what they've planned. They've planned for incremental destabilization of countries all around the world, and some are going to go before the others, but that's what they want to do, and that's where I view it heading. And the people in Greece right now, the mainstream media aren't reporting on it. They're rioting in the streets because, as Silver Slave said in the comments, he said bankers give a country two choices: one, debt; two, death. And it's essentially what the Greeks are facing over there. And I know that because I have friends and family that live over there, and people who I'm associated with that are Greek as well and have family over there. And when you're restricted to withdrawing funds, when there's no money in the economy, yet your taxes are going higher, when all of your wages are being taken, when unemployment is over 28% over there, the real statistics, it's a troubling situation, and that's just because they got the short end of the stick after the financial crisis, and Goldman Sachs and these oligarchs that went into the EU planned to collapse it by design. In Greece, this deal for the short term may last three years, may last 2 days. I don't know if the lawmakers have passed it through yet. That was one of the bail conditions. But then they'll be in the exact same situation, even worse, and it's going to continue on. And as that happens, the global economy is affected, the false zombie paradigm, and then it's going to affect the weaker countries with the weaker dollars like Australia, and the path is going to begin incrementally. And that's the way I see it. But it certainly is an interesting topic, and if I had a final thought, is just encourage people to do your own research, look into what's happening, look into your own investments, your own money, look into withdrawing it from banks, have something secure, look into assets, whatever you need to do, because if we can identify precedents in Greece right now, we should be able to continue on into the future a lot stronger now that we have an example of what can happen. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll have to come back and see where this path takes us, because for now it's all guesswork, and Greece have just gone on to another measure of austerities which have already crippled the country and are going to continue to cripple the country even more, John.
Fair enough. Well, it is time to wrap up the show. The time goes so quickly, so we'll get into our final thoughts. We'll start with you there, Lindsay. Final thoughts for episode 41 on July 19.
I'm feeling fairly positive about things the way they're going. I'm like, to get 56 people watching us or listening to us now, I think is very positive. And just from what they're saying on the chat that I've just been looking at, I think many of them will be talking to their friends and neighbours. You had the one you mentioned earlier in Canada, which brought 4 or 5 people in. I think you'll find this will be spreading. I'm not suggesting because of us, but in general, that the whole feeling that things aren't right, we've got to do something about it, is starting to spread wider, and they will come across more people. They will educate people about climate change and bankers, and it'll just go on. So I'm feeling a bit more positive about things each time we do one of these shows. The second thing was that I love listening to this because I get a different take on things. Like Ethan bringing up the business about social media and Facebook. I enjoy that because I don't have access to that, and I like to get a younger person's view on what's happening, because it helps me to fill in the gaps between when I was young and today. So it's good for me. I really enjoy coming along and listening to what you fellas have to say, and I do get, now that I've finally worked out how to look at the chat room, I do enjoy watching. Every now and again I have a glimpse and see what people are saying on the chat room, and I find that good as well. So this is good for me, if that makes sense, but I think it's also good for the world, in that I think we are starting to get the message in wider and wider circles. It might only be a drop in the ocean, but it is starting to spread. So anyway, I'll stop talking, let you say what you've got to say, Jono.
Oh, over to Ethan.
Yeah, not much to add to our final thoughts. I just want to thank everyone once again for tuning into the show. Just to have a community like this every week to discuss what we're talking about, whether they disagree with us, whether they agree with us, it's a great thing. And this is exactly what grassroots brainstorming should be all about, and I appreciate everyone coming out to watch the show and hear the information. I encourage everyone to go to ozroundtable.com to share the links around, to support alternative media in Australia, to do all you can, start your own shows. Let's really make a go of it. Let's really put it into high gear and try to get the message out there, because a lot of people, they're only brainwashed by the TV because they don't know there's an alternative, because the TV doesn't tell them there's an alternative. And if we could try break through to that, I really think we could have some positive results with the information that we're going, and who knows, it could snowball from them. So thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Good stuff. Well, I have to, first of all, just make an apology. I'm the one responsible for uploading our files to MP3 to Podbean and for updating our site, and I was a couple of weeks behind, but I have fixed that up now. So if you go to ozroundtable.com, you'll have episode pages for every episode right up until last week, and then I'll get today's episode done hopefully by tomorrow night, and it's all up to date. And we do encourage people to go and check out the site. Again, there's no ads, there's no donation button, just all of the articles that we cite during the show, all of the kinds of documentaries and books that we recommend people check out for further information. That's the kind of information that we provide there, because like we always say, we don't want you to listen to us and trust what we're saying. That's the worst thing you can do at all. The best thing that you can do is your own research. So check out our site. Again, the MP3 files are all there to download for free. We encourage you to do that, especially if you haven't listened to it in the past. But even if you have, just download them to your hard drive, just in case something ever happens to our Podbean account or whatever. The more copies that are out there, the better. Of course, we are still being broadcast on Friday afternoons, is it, Ethan, on Rad FM?
4 p.m. on Rad FM each Friday. The Australian Roundtable is on radfm.com, and the Know Your Rights show Tuesday, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. I do encourage our listeners to go and listen to that on radfm.com. It's a fantastic show, and if you want to reach out to more Australians that are on similar wavelengths to what we are and speaking information that we are, go listen to the Know Your Rights show on Rad FM. Shout out to informedplanet.org and everyone that supports what we're doing here.
Good stuff. Now, we will, of course, go to an after show for the live listeners in just a moment, so stick around, live listeners. Also, just a quick shameless plug for my own channel, John LeBon. I'm obviously doing a couple of shows during the week these days, and it's a slightly different show to this one with a very different basic concept and premise, but a lot of people seem to be enjoying it. So if you haven't already, then please do go and check out John LeBon, and perhaps you'll find out some things that you didn't previously know, and that's what this is all about, spreading the word. And I do encourage people, if you think that the show that we're putting together is worth your time, then we appreciate that. There's a good chance there'll be people who will think the same thing of you, so I strongly encourage you, if you've ever thought about doing your own show, now is the time to do it. There is a dearth of alternative information out there, in Australia especially, but across the world in general, and you can be a part of trying to change that by doing a show like this. So if you want any information about it, any advice or tips that we can offer, we'll be more than happy to offer that to you. And if we can, we'll even promote your show. Get in touch with us, australianroundtable@gmail.com. There's also a comment section on our website, and you can leave comments underneath the episodes on YouTube. So plenty of ways to get in touch with us. We encourage you to do so, and we thank you so much for listening to us today, as we always do. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.